Florida Keys had always drawn divers with the promise of warm currents, clear water, and the haunting beauty of wrecks that rested beneath the surface. Their corroded structures transformed into artificial reefs that teemed with life. On June 15, 2024, two divers, 29-year-old Hannah Reed and her companion Miguel Santos, descended into that world with confidence, prepared for the exploration of a partially sunken cargo ship that had become a popular sight for those seeking both history and adventure. They carried themselves with the practiced ease of experienced divers, their movements steady as they slipped into the water, unaware that the dive would turn into a desperate struggle for survival against one of the ocean's most formidable predators. The wreck lay on its side in shallow waters, its hull cracked and broken from years of storms and salt. Its decks now twisted beams where schools of fish darted between pockets of shadow. Hannah swam close to the starboard opening, her flashlight cutting through the gloom, illuminating the scattered cargo containers that had collapsed into the sediment. At the same time, Miguel circled along the outer edge, scanning for movement as clouds of baitfish scattered in bursts around him. The wreck had a presence that stirred both awe and unease, for every shift of metal seemed to echo through the water, and every corner carried a darkness that could hide both fragile beauty and hidden danger. As they maneuvered through a gap in the broken hull, disturbed silt drifted upward in hazy clouds, shrouding their view and disorienting them as the small fish that lived in the wreck panicked, thrashing toward open water. It was this sudden agitation that drew the attention of something far larger lurking in the murky distance, a massive tiger shark, its striped flanks fading in and out of view like a phantom as it glided closer with slow but deliberate movements, its senses sharpened by the vibrations of the commotion. Hannah felt the water pressure shift before she saw it, a subtle surge that signaled the approach of bulk and power. And when she turned her light across the shadowy opening, the striped predator lunged forward with terrifying speed. Its first strike slammed against her shoulder, the force spinning her sideways into a jagged section of the hull. And as she tried to recover, the shark's jaws clamped down on her forearm, crushing through neoprene and flesh in a sudden eruption of pain. The water erupted with silt and bubbles as she thrashed, the predator's grip shaking her violently before releasing in a spray of blood that clouded the space around her. Miguel reacted instantly, his dive knife flashing as he struck at the great head that loomed in front of him, desperate to drive the animal back. And though his blow scraped along the shark's tough hide, the predator swung in a wide arc and snapped onto his leg with brutal force. The bite drove him downward against the debris-strewn floor, the jagged metal slicing his side as the animal wrenched him once before letting go, circling in a haze of blood that spread quickly in the confined wreck. The setting made escape nearly impossible, for every movement stirred more silt, and each broken beam threatened to trap their tanks or snag their fins as they fought to orient themselves. Hannah, clutching her torn arm against her chest, kicked frantically toward a slanted deck that jutted close to the surface, her vision blurring as pain and shock flooded her senses. Miguel struggled behind her, his leg trailing ribbons of blood as he pushed upward with desperate strokes, the water around him alive with the menace of a predator that had not yet finished. The tiger shark's movements were deliberate, circling and lunging, testing its wounded prey as it returned again and again with sweeping arcs through the confined space, its wide head brushing against the rusted beams as its eyes tracked the struggling divers. Each time it passed, the wreck reverberated with the impact of its massive body, and Hannah could feel the vibrations run through her, as if the ship itself were shuddering under the weight of the predator's attack. They reached the partially submerged deck, only to find the surface still several feet above them, a barrier of collapsing metal blocking a direct ascent, forcing them to claw their way upward through twisted beams and clouded water. Their tanks clanged against steel as they kicked, their bodies scraping along rusted edges that tore at their wetsuits and skin. And all the while the shark circled beneath, the flick of its tail stirring whirlpools that rocked the wreck and pulled them off balance. Minutes passed like hours as the attack continued, each second filled with the certainty that the predator would surge upward again to finish what it had started. And both divers found themselves consumed by raw survival instinct, their limbs moving with frantic urgency even as their bodies weakened from blood loss. When the shark at last veered away, slipping back into the darker water beyond the wreck, it was not out of mercy. Still a momentary decision, perhaps drawn by the overwhelming cloud of blood that had spread too widely to focus on a single target. Seizing that chance, Hannah and Miguel broke through the final gap, emerging into open water above the tilted deck, and with labored strokes they pushed upward until their heads broke the surface. Gasping against the air, clinging to the corroded edge of the wreck, they collapsed together, blood streaming from their wounds as the swell of the sea carried them against the jagged steel. Their dive gear hung in tatters, their bodies bruised, gashed, and drained. Yet they were alive, holding to each other with the desperate strength of those who had escaped a force far beyond their control. The ocean around them seemed endless, the wreck beneath concealing the predator that might still return at any moment. And the realization that safety lay only in endurance settled heavily on them as they pressed themselves against the corroded edge and waited for help. The water carried the faint shimmer of their blood in spreading plumes, a silent marker of the struggle that had unfolded below, and every passing current felt like the whisper of the shark's return. For Hannah and Miguel, the attack left scars deeper than the wounds that marked their bodies. For the sea they had trusted as a place of wonder and exploration had revealed itself as a realm where survival was not guaranteed, and where even experience could not protect against the sudden violence of a predator's strike. Their emergence from the water that day, battered and clinging to the wreckage, stood as a reminder of how fragile the line was between awe and terror, and how quickly the ocean could turn from sanctuary to battlefield when its hidden hunters appeared. The summer waters off San Diego carried the usual energy of crowds eager for the thrill of speed and spray, the shoreline buzzing with jet skis carving across the surface in streaks of white wake. On the bright afternoon of July 30th, 2025, the ocean seemed like a playground for the dozens of riders gathered near the outer swells, their engines growling in bursts as they wove in and out of one another's paths. Among them was 25-year-old Brandon Keller, a rider who relished the sense of freedom that came from leaning into the curves and skimming across the blue surface at high speed, trusting his balance and reflexes against the unpredictable movements of the sea. The waves built unevenly with the shifting tide, and in the chaos of tight turns and sharp acceleration, Brandon lost control on a sudden jolt of swell that sent his craft pitching sideways. He flew forward, slamming into the water with a heavy smack that knocked the wind from his lungs and left him stunned in the seconds that followed. The impact spread ripples across the surface, a commotion that echoed far deeper than he could imagine, sending vibrations that carried into the territory of a predator built to sense exactly that kind of disturbance. Beneath the sunlit surface, a short-fin mako shark, one of the ocean's fastest and most aggressive hunters, surged toward the noise with astonishing speed. Its body cut through the water like a torpedo, its streamlined shape and powerful tail capable of reaching bursts near 40 miles per hour. As it ascended from the depths, the flash of its silver-blue flanks shimmered briefly before it drove upward in a strike that blurred the line between instinct and violence. The attack came with no warning. Brandon, still reeling from the fall, felt the surge below him a fraction of a second, before the shark's jaws clamped into his shoulder and arm with brutal force. The pressure was crushing, the teeth sawing into muscle and bone as the predator thrashed with violent bursts of speed, pulling him sideways in a spiral of foam and blood. The water filled with his scream as he flailed against the sheer power of an animal that could accelerate faster than any other shark in the ocean, its movements sharp and explosive, designed to overwhelm prey before escape was even possible. Nearby riders saw the water erupt. Their initial confusion quickly turned to horror as they recognized the sleek shape beneath the surface, the mako's dorsal fin slicing upward before vanishing again in a violent roll. Brandon's friends raced toward him, throttling their jet skis hard, their only weapon the paddles and equipment strapped to their machines. They beat against the surface in desperation, trying to distract the predator, their movements frantic as Brandon struggled in the blood-stained water. The shark released for a moment only to dart back in with another strike, snapping again at his arm with lightning speed before circling away, its quick, whip-like motions unlike the slow, deliberate movements of larger sharks. The rescue unfolded with the urgency of sheer survival. Brandon thrashed weakly, his strength fading as the water around him darkened with spreading blood. His shoulder ripped open, and his arm shredded by the shark's initial bite. His friends leaned down from their jet skis, gripping his vest and dragging him upward with all the strength they could summon, the machines bucking under the strain as waves pitched them dangerously close to capsizing. Every second carried the fear that the mako would surge back from below, striking again with the kind of velocity that few humans had ever seen up close. Witnesses shouted from nearby as the predator circled, its fin cutting a tight arc before it broke the surface in an explosive leap, its full length clearing the water in a sudden, breathtaking display of power. The shark's body hung in the air for a fraction of a second, sunlight glinting off its metallic skin, before it crashed back down with a spray of foam. The sight burned into the memory of everyone present, for there were few things more terrifying than seeing a predator of that speed and ferocity launch itself completely free of the sea, its raw athleticism on display even in the midst of an attack. The friends managed to haul Brandon onto one of the jet skis, his blood slicking across the seat as they wrapped their arms around him to hold him steady. His face was pale, his breath ragged, every movement filled with shock and agony as the predator continued to circle, refusing to abandon its interest in the chaos that still churned above. Another leap sent its body arcing clear of the water a second time, a final display before it vanished into the depths with the same speed it had arrived, leaving behind only the churned swells and the spreading evidence of what it had done. The ride back toward shore became a desperate dash, the jet ski engines roaring as Brandon's companions held him tight, his injuries bleeding heavily despite makeshift attempts to compress the wounds. Every second mattered. The realization was clear to them all, that the difference between survival and death now hinged on whether they could deliver him to help before blood loss overtook him. The crowd on the beach saw the frantic return and rushed to meet them, the scene of panic carrying forward as emergency responders fought to stabilize him against the kind of trauma that only the fastest shark in the sea could inflict. Doctors later described the damage as extensive but survivable, with the teeth marks and shredded muscle consistent with the attack of a short-fin mako, a predator known for its ability to reach speeds that could rival those of a speeding boat and its tendency to strike with sudden explosive bursts. For Brandon, the reality of what he had endured settled in slowly, the memory of the attack replaying in fragments of thrashing motion, the crushing force of jaws, and the shocking sight of the shark's body soaring above the surface. For locals, the event became more than just another story of a shark encounter, for it had unfolded in full view of dozens of witnesses. This spectacle transformed a day of high-speed sport into a reminder that the ocean was never truly tamed. The ocean had seemed calm and inviting on May 21, 2025. The kind of turquoise water that made people forget how quickly danger could rise beneath the surface. For Laura Simmons, a 33-year-old mother from Florida, the chance to relax with her 7-year-old son Leo on a bright inflatable flamingo had felt harmless, even joyful, as they floated under the warmth of the Bahamian sun just a little way off the beaches of Bimini. The flamingo rocked gently in the swells, and Laura let herself drift, unaware that the current was carrying them farther out, pushing them slowly beyond the comfort of shallow water, beyond the safety of swimmers still close to shore, and into the domain of creatures few ever truly expected to encounter. Beneath the surface, a massive hammerhead shark patrolled the sandy bottom, its wide, flattened head sweeping from side to side as it searched for prey, following faint vibrations and the electric pulses of life that echoed through the water. The inflatable flamingo with its splashing riders became a beacon. This unusual shape stirred the shark's curiosity. As the distance between Laura and the beach grew, the predator began to close the gap with measured, powerful strokes of its tail, rising slowly from deeper water until its shadow merged with the bright shimmer near the surface. Laura only realized something was wrong when the flamingo jolted hard from below, the impact so sudden that she nearly lost her grip. Before she could process what had happened, the water beside her erupted in white spray as the hammerhead surged up, ramming the inflatable again and tearing at its plastic with wide, snapping jaws. She screamed and wrapped her arms around Leo, trying to shield him as the flamingo twisted violently, the sound of tearing plastic mixing with the slap of waves, and then she felt teeth rake across her forearm, a flash of pain that told her the shark had made contact. The flamingo deflated quickly, hissing as air escaped, and the next moment they were thrown into the sea, the water rushing cold around them, the inflatable spinning away half-collapsed. Laura clutched Leo tightly, forcing him onto her back as she kicked desperately, her free arm sweeping to keep him afloat, her injured arm bleeding into the sea. The hammerhead wheeled around immediately, its tall dorsal fin slicing the surface as it circled the splashing figures, drawn by the scent of blood and the erratic vibrations of prey and distress. Laura's heart pounded as she tried to keep her head above water, her legs kicking furiously, her eyes locked on the dark shape cutting arcs beneath them. Every second felt stretched thin, the vast ocean closing in around her, and she knew instinct told her to fight, to appear large, to strike if she had to, even as panic threatened to take over. She jabbed downward with her foot when the shark came close, her heel connecting with rough skin that felt like sandpaper. And though the hammerhead veered off briefly, it came back again, circling with relentless patience. Leo cried out in fear, his small hands gripping her shoulders, and Laura gritted her teeth, forcing herself to focus, forcing herself to keep him above the waterline. She swung her good arm in the water, pushing him higher, trying to make herself a barrier between her child and the predator. The hammerhead's movements grew bolder, and soon its massive head broke the surface, its strange eyes set far apart as its jaws snapped just feet away, sending water splashing into their faces. Nearby snorkelers had heard the screams and seen the frantic splashing, and several of them swam toward the scene, shouting as they splashed their fins and waved their arms, throwing floating buoys they carried with them to distract the shark. The commotion made the hammerhead hesitate, its sweeping head turning side to side as if assessing the new noise. Still, each time Laura thought it might retreat, it curved back, its fin slicing closer, the water foaming as its massive body moved with frightening power. Laura kicked again and again, her legs burning with effort, her lungs aching as salt water stung her throat, and she fought to stay upright with Leo clinging to her back. The snorkelers kept shouting, slapping the surface to create confusion, and one hurled a buoy directly between the shark and the struggling mother and child, causing the predator to veer sharply to one side. The seconds dragged as the hammerhead circled again, but at last its movements slowed, its wide head sweeping as if it had lost interest. And then with a sudden surge it turned away, slipping back into the deeper water that had birthed it. Laura's arms shook with exhaustion as she clung to the floating buoy tossed their way, pulling Leo tight against her chest while she kicked toward the approaching snorkelers. Together they guided her toward the shore, supporting her bleeding arm and steadying the boy, who was trembling but alive. When they finally reached the shallows, Laura collapsed to her knees, the sand beneath her hands and the crash of waves around her feeling like the most solid ground she had ever known. Doctors later treated her for deep cuts and puncture wounds on her arm, and though the injuries were serious, she was alive, and Leo had escaped with only minor scrapes. For the locals who had watched from the beach and the tourists who had rushed into the water to help, the sight of the hammerhead circling the mother and child would never be forgotten, a reminder that even a playful afternoon on a bright inflatable could change without warning into a fight for survival against one of the ocean's most formidable hunters. The experts who examined the scene explained that hammerheads were powerful predators, often drawn to splashing and unusual shapes at the surface, and that drifting too far from shore on inflatables could put even cautious swimmers in sudden danger. For Laura and Leo, the experience would forever mark the boundary between innocence and the reality of the sea, a moment where survival had depended on instinct, courage, and the desperate will to protect what mattered most. On the morning of August 17, 2022, the offshore waters of Queensland, Australia, stretched endlessly beneath a cloudless sky, shimmering in shifting blues as the swell rose and fell in steady rhythm, and out upon that restless expanse a fleet of boats prepared for the annual fishing tournament that drew professional anglers from across the region. Among them was Liam O'Connor, a seasoned competitor with years of experience and a reputation for skill and determination, who stood at the rail of his 20-foot vessel with the sun burning at his back and the salt spray cooling his skin. For Liam, the sea was both a challenge and a calling, and every tournament was another test against creatures that lived beyond the reach of land. But on this day, the ocean would reveal itself not as sport, but as predator. By mid-afternoon, the competition was fierce, with anglers reporting large catches and heavy lines straining under the pull of tuna and marlin that surged through the depths. And Liam's crew, a small but capable team, watched with anticipation as his rod bent violently under the weight of something massive below. The reel screamed as the line tore away, and Liam braced himself against the side of the boat, muscles taut as he fought to keep control of the furious creature hooked beneath. The others steadied the deck and cleared gear out of the way, giving him space as he leaned over, the taut line slicing through the surface and marking the struggle below. What he believed was a powerful tuna twisted and surged, thrashing toward the light, but the ocean always carried more than a fisherman could see, and another shadow had risen with intent far more lethal. From the deep, sudden, and unstoppable, a tiger shark nearly 13 feet in length surged upward, its body a blur of muscle and striped power, its jaws flaring open to clamp down on both the struggling tuna and the line that tethered it. The force was immediate and violent, jerking the rod from Liam's grip and wrenching his balance forward as the surface exploded in froth and blood. The boat rocked beneath the sudden weight of the predator's strike, and before he could recover, Liam toppled over the rail and into the chaos, his body crashing into the churning water alongside the wounded fish and the thrashing shape of the shark that had claimed it. Cold engulfed him, but there was no time to orient himself, no chance to think of escape, for the tiger shark, already in frenzy from the hooked tuna, shifted instantly toward the human presence beside it. In a blur of motion, the predator struck, its jaws clamping down with terrible precision on Liam's leg, the serrated teeth puncturing flesh and bone as it thrashed with the rolling power of the sea itself. The water turned dark in seconds as blood poured from the wound, spiraling in crimson clouds that only intensified the shark's violence. Above, the small vessel rocked violently. The crew was powerless as they reached for poles and ropes, their shouts drowned by wind and spray, their eyes wide with horror at the sight of their companion dragged beneath the waves. Liam fought desperately, clutching for the gaff that floated beside him, and with trembling strength, he thrust it forward in frantic attempts to drive the steel into the shark's flank. For a moment, the predator twisted, rolling in anger at the sudden sting, but its grip only tightened, its head jerking side to side in brutal arcs that tore flesh wider with every second. The ocean became a boiling arena of foam and blood, each wave carrying fragments of struggle to the surface, as Liam's strength faltered against the sheer force of the predator. The gaff slipped from his weakening grip, vanishing beneath the surge, and the shark dragged him deeper, its massive tail beating water with the rhythm of inevitability. For the crew, leaning helplessly over the side, there was no means of intervention, only the terrible sight of fins slicing through the red-streaked water, and the brief glimpse of Liam's arms reaching skyward before the sea consumed him again. Time collapsed into heartbeats as the struggle raged below. But against a predator evolved for this purpose, there was no contest, and by the time the shark released him, its jaws loosening at last in satisfaction or instinct, Liam's body drifted upward, limp and still, already succumbing to the catastrophic blood loss and trauma inflicted in mere moments. The sea rocked him with indifferent rhythm, carrying him back toward the surface where the stunned crew pulled him aboard, their hands trembling as they pressed against wounds that no pressure could hope to stem. The tournament waters, once filled with shouts and the excitement of competition, now carried only silence around the small vessel as nearby boats turned toward the scene, drawn by the commotion but arriving too late to alter its outcome. The shark had vanished into the depths as quickly as it had come, leaving only the crimson trail to mark its passing, a reminder of how thin the line was between sport and survival in these unforgiving waters. The crew could do nothing but cradle their fallen angler as the boat turned back toward shore, the coastline now a distant blur against the horizon. And though radios crackled with urgent calls for medical aid, each passing minute confirmed the finality of what had occurred. By the time they reached the waiting rescue team, Liam was beyond saving. His life lost, not in the calm of old age or the silence of land, but in the furious embrace of the sea he had loved, claimed by the teeth of a predator that had acted on instinct rather than malice. His death rippled quickly through the fishing community. Word spread that the seasoned angler had been claimed in the midst of competition, when all his skill and preparation meant nothing against nature's raw force. The tragedy underscored what many already knew but often ignored, that offshore waters, however thrilling, remained unpredictable and dangerous, and that the apex predators who prowled them could turn a day of sport into a fatal encounter in the space of a heartbeat. On September 1, 2020, the waters off Baja California stretched wide and endless, the sunlight catching the crests of waves and scattering into brilliance. But below the surface, the sea shifted into a different world, darker, colder, and filled with hidden movement. Marine photographer Luca Bellini descended slowly near a steep drop-off where the reef gave way to open water, his breathing steady through the regulator as he adjusted his camera equipment, intent on capturing the powerful beauty of tuna schools that had gathered along the edge of the slope. He had made countless dives before, and his confidence came not from arrogance but from years of careful experience. Yet the sea remained unpredictable, and on this day it would show him just how fragile the line was between safety and catastrophe, when vision was stolen and predators moved unseen. At first, the dive unfolded smoothly, the water clear enough to track the shimmering bodies of tuna as they twisted in unison, flashes of silver cutting through the blue void and movements that spoke of survival and instinct. Luca hovered near the ledge, steadying his camera housing as he captured the arcs and swirls, aware of the reef behind him but focused on the spectacle ahead. Then, without warning, the clarity began to dissolve, the incoming current stirring silt and debris into the water until the world around him blurred, visibility shrinking to only a few feet. The sharp edges of the reef softened into shadows. The outlines of fish melted into haze, and the sense of space closed in with unsettling speed. Luca pressed forward cautiously, knowing such conditions demanded heightened awareness, but no lens or training could prepare him for what surged suddenly from the darkness. The attack was explosive and immediate. A blur of speed and force as an 11-foot short-fin mako erupted from the clouded water in pursuit of a fleeing fish, its jaws gaping and teeth flashing white before clamping down in a strike so fast it seemed instantaneous. Luca barely registered the predator before pain seared through his lower leg, the shark's bite tearing straight through neoprene and flesh as its momentum sent him spinning violently in the suspended haze. His camera wrenched sideways, bubbles erupted from his mask, and the world became chaos as the force of impact disoriented him completely. Blood streamed from the wound, rising in a red cloud that mixed with the silt until he could no longer separate injury from environment, his vision swallowed by murk and panic. The predator did not vanish, for the mako circled back through the fog of debris, its body cutting arcs around him that stirred the sand and fragments into thicker clouds, the water now alive with unseen movement. Luca's heartbeat hammered in his ears, every pulse an echo of fear as adrenaline flooded his body, sharpening some senses while blinding others. He could not see clearly, could not track the exact position of the shark, but he felt its presence in the vibrations through the water, the subtle pressure waves that betrayed its speed as it swept close, sometimes near enough that he glimpsed the rough gleam of its flank before it disappeared again into shadow. Instinct and training fused in desperation as he gripped the metal housing of his camera with trembling hands, forcing himself to wield it not as delicate equipment but as a weapon, something solid to place between his body and the predator that hunted too near. He swung it outward each time the water shifted, striking at nothing more than currents, but trusting that when the shark closed in again, the steel edges would provide resistance, even momentary, against jaws capable of tearing through flesh with ease. Each second stretched unbearably long, the silence of the deep broken only by the rasp of his breath and the occasional rush of water displaced by movement too close to ignore. Disoriented and bleeding, Luca forced himself to find the reef wall again, pressing his hand to the rough surface and feeling along the contours with desperate determination, knowing that proximity to stone meant one less angle of approach for the predator. The rock tore his gloves and scraped his skin, but he ignored the pain, sliding along slowly, inch by inch, fighting against the pull of the current and the weakness beginning to creep into his leg as blood loss sapped his strength. Each push forward was met with the shark's presence, sometimes a sudden flash of motion in the murk, other times only the thrum of power felt in the water before it veered off again. Unsettled by the movements of the metal camera swung in its path, his breaths grew harsher, fogging the mask as his chest tightened, but he pressed onward, guiding himself upward along the reef slope until the faint light above grew stronger, the greenish haze of the surface drawing closer with each painful kick. His wounded leg dragged heavily, numb yet burning, the torn wetsuit clinging in tatters, and still he forced himself to ascend, pushing through the clouded water with the knowledge that only by reaching the air above could he escape the predator that waited below. The mako circled one last time, its sleek form brushing past him close enough that the pressure knocked him sideways against the stone, his knuckles splitting as they struck the reef, yet the shark did not close for another bite. Whether deterred by the thrashing camera, distracted by the cloud of debris, or satisfied by the first strike, it slipped back into the deeper water, vanishing as swiftly as it had appeared, leaving Luca suspended in a haze of blood and fear. Breaking the surface at last, he gasped into the open air, the bright sun blinding after the darkness below, his body trembling as the salt burned into the wound on his leg. He waved weakly toward the dive boat stationed in the distance, the crew already moving into action as they spotted the distress. And moments later, he was pulled aboard, his body collapsing onto the deck as hands pressed towels and bandages to the deep gash that stretched across his calf. The bleeding slowed under pressure, but the shock lingered, his eyes wide and unfocused as the memory replayed. The flash of teeth, the sudden strike, the helpless spinning through murky water with a predator circling unseen. Back on shore, doctors stitched the torn flesh and treated the bruising that spread across muscle and bone, And though he would recover, the scars, both physical and emotional, would remain. For Luca, the dive that had begun as a routine pursuit of beauty had transformed in seconds into a fight for survival. The encounter left him shaken but alive, a narrow escape from the jaws of a mako in waters that demanded respect, where the margin between documentation and disaster proved frighteningly thin. Amara Voss had spent years chasing the thrill of open water racing, mastering the wind, the swell, and the unpredictable moods of the sea, and during the offshore regatta near Cape Point, the conditions were as unforgiving as they were exhilarating. With sharp gusts sweeping across the whitecaps and boats carving aggressive lines through the swells. But nothing in her long sailing career could have prepared her for the sudden and unnerving encounter that unfolded that day. Her yacht, a sleek 30-foot racing vessel designed for speed and agility, cut tightly across a stretch of rolling water. Sails strained against the wind when the first ripple of unease rippled through her. A distinct disturbance beneath the surface, broad shadows sliding alongside the hull, too synchronized to be anything but orcas. The pod moved with deliberate grace, their towering dorsal fins slicing above the chop, and Amara's pulse quickened as she realized just how close they were to her boat. Then the massive bull revealed itself, rising and rolling with startling proximity, its sheer size dwarfing her craft, and in a single powerful surge, it rammed the hull with a force so jarring that the yacht pitched violently, throwing Amara off balance and slamming her hard against the deck. Pain erupted across her chest and shoulder, the impact leaving her gasping, ribs stabbing with sharp heat as she clutched for something to hold on to, and in that instant, the adrenaline that every racer knows flooded her body. But this time it wasn't the thrill of competition, it was survival. The bull lingered beneath the stern, circling with unnerving precision, its white markings flashing through the rolling water as it nudged at the yacht's underside again, sending vibrations up through the keel. Loose lines snapped across the deck, a gear bag tumbled into the spray, and Amara forced herself upright despite the pain, knowing that one wrong move, one slip into the water, would put her directly in the path of one of the most intelligent and powerful predators in the ocean. Her fingers worked swiftly, tying off loose sheets, steadying the helm, forcing the boat back into some semblance of stability, but the orca showed no sign of leaving. Another nudge to the stern sent her skidding across the deck, her bruised shoulder screaming in protest as she caught herself against the rail. Every instinct told her to remain calm, to avoid any frantic movement that might draw further interest, yet her heart raced uncontrollably as she tracked the pod circling with eerie patience. The smaller orcas swam alongside the bull, surfacing and dipping back into the waves with powerful ease, while the massive male returned again and again to press against the hull, as if testing the strange object that dared to cut so swiftly through its territory. For long minutes, Amara's world shrank to the sound of splintering waves, the groan of her stressed yacht, and the explosive exhalations of the orcas surfacing just meters away. She tried to steady her breathing, adjusting her grip on the wheel and shifting her weight to account for the battered rig, forcing herself to think through the haze of pain. If she fell, even for a moment, the outcome could be catastrophic. Though orcas were not known for indiscriminate attacks on humans, their immense power and unpredictability in such close proximity turned her racing yacht into a fragile shell adrift among giants. A sharp crack of pain in her side reminded her of the cracked rib, every breath short and shallow. But she focused on what she could control, keeping the vessel upright, avoiding any sudden lurch that could topple her into the cold depths. She trimmed the sails carefully, using the wind to steady the boat and create distance, even as the bull returned once more to push at the stern, sending shockwaves up through the hull. The encounter stretched on, each passing second heavy with dread, and the ocean around her became a stage for an unpredictable dance between human and predator, fragile yacht and apex hunter. The bull surfaced again, towering fin cutting the water before it slipped beneath the waves with the force of a torpedo, reappearing at the bow before falling back into the depths. Amara braced herself, every nerve anticipating another strike, her muscles tight with exhaustion and fear. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the mood shifted. The pod slowed, circling one last time before peeling away into deeper water, their immense bodies vanishing beneath the swells with uncanny silence. The tension snapped, leaving Amara trembling with the realization that she had endured minutes that felt like hours, balanced on the knife edge between control and catastrophe. With the orcas gone, the wind returned as her only adversary, and she forced herself to focus on the course ahead, guiding her battered vessel back into formation, ignoring the throbbing pain that pulsed with every movement. The other boats were distant specks on the horizon, unaware of the storm of fear and adrenaline that had erupted aboard her yacht. and she alone bore the weight of what had happened in those haunting moments offshore. By the time she reached port, her body was bruised, her ribs aching with every breath, and medics quickly assessed her injuries, wrapping her side and noting the deep bruising along her shoulder and arm, the kind of trauma only sheer impact could cause. Yet the greater impression was not the pain in her body but the stark memory of the pod, the immense intelligence in their movements, and the raw reminder that even seasoned sailors remain vulnerable when the ocean's apex predators choose to interact. The incident quickly circulated among the regatta community, sparking debates about the unpredictability of orca encounters, and though experts assured that such behavior was likely curiosity rather than aggression, the reality for Amara was carved into her memory. She had come face to face with wild orcas not as a spectator, but as an unwilling participant in their world, and the raw power she felt beneath her hull would remain with her long after her bruises faded. For Amara, the regatta near Cape Point became more than a race against rivals and wind. It became a confrontation with the untamed forces of the sea, a reminder that no amount of skill or preparation can strip away the unpredictability of the wild, and that survival at sea is always balanced on the shifting edge of nature's will. Florianópolis, the capital city of Santa Catarina State in southern Brazil, sits strategically positioned on Santa Catarina Island, connected to the mainland by two suspension bridges. The region's unique geography creates ideal conditions for paragliding, with consistent thermal updrafts generated by the interaction between the Atlantic Ocean and the island's mountainous terrain. Since the 1990s, the area has developed into one of South America's premier destinations for extreme sports enthusiasts, attracting adventurers from across the continent who sought the perfect combination of reliable wind conditions and spectacular coastal scenery. The northern beaches of Florianópolis, particularly the stretch near Canasvieiras, offered launching sites that provided paragliders with sweeping views of both the ocean and the island's interior lagoons. Local regulations required all paragliding operations to maintain a minimum altitude of 100 meters above sea level. However, experienced pilots often pushed these boundaries when conditions permitted extended flight times. Marco Ribeiro, a 28-year-old paragliding instructor from São Paulo, had traveled to Florianópolis in March 2023 to participate in the annual Southern Cross Paragliding Festival. Ribeiro possessed over 8 years of experience in the sport and held advanced certifications from the Brazilian Paragliding Association. His custom-built paraglider featured a high-performance wing designed for acrobatic maneuvers, though such equipment required exceptional skill to operate safely in challenging conditions. On the morning of March 15th, Ribeiro joined 12 other paragliders for a group session launched from the coastal cliffs overlooking Praia do Santinho. Weather conditions appeared favorable, with steady 15-knot winds flowing from the northeast and visibility extending beyond 10 kilometers. The planned flight pattern would take the group along the coastline, before turning inland toward the designated landing zone near the festival headquarters. Ribeiro launched successfully at 9:15, his paraglider catching the morning thermals and climbing rapidly to an altitude of 300 meters. The group maintained loose formation as they progressed northward along the coast, with Ribeiro positioning himself slightly seaward of the main cluster to capture stronger thermal currents rising from the sun-warmed ocean surface. 20 minutes into the flight, as Ribeiro attempted a sharp banking turn to rejoin the group, his primary steering line snapped under the increased tension. The paraglider immediately lost directional control, beginning a rapid clockwise spiral that Ribeiro could not correct despite deploying his reserve steering system. His altitude dropped precipitously as the malfunctioning wing collapsed partially, transforming his controlled flight into an uncontrolled descent toward the ocean. Fellow paragliders Sebastião Monteiro and Ana Ferreira witnessed Ribeiro's equipment failure and immediately adjusted their flight paths to track his descent. Monteiro activated his emergency radio, broadcasting distress calls to both the Coastal Rescue Service and the festival's ground control station. However, the rapid nature of Ribeiro's fall left insufficient time for conventional rescue operations to respond effectively. Ribeiro struck the ocean surface approximately 400 meters from shore, the impact separating him from his paraglider harness as the wing collapsed completely and began sinking. The sudden splash and thrashing movements in the water attracted the attention of a 10-foot shortfin mako shark that had been hunting in the area. Shortfin makos, known as the fastest sharks in the ocean, typically patrol these waters during the warmer months while following schools of tuna and other pelagic fish species. The shark approached Ribeiro within seconds of his water entry, drawn by the unusual disturbance and the rapid movements of a struggling surface target. as Ribeiro attempted to inflate his emergency flotation device. The mako struck his right calf with devastating speed. The shark's narrow, pointed teeth pierced his wetsuit and penetrated deep into the muscle tissue, causing immediate, severe bleeding. Ribeiro fought to remain conscious as the shark released its initial bite and began circling for a potential second attack. His military training from mandatory Brazilian service had included basic water survival techniques, which proved crucial as he struggled to minimize his movements while maintaining buoyancy. The inflated emergency flotation device kept him partially above the surface despite his weakening condition. Monteiro and Ferreira, observing the attack from above, began dropping their emergency equipment toward Ribeiro's position. Ferreira released her backup flotation device, which landed within reaching distance, while Monteiro used his emergency flare to signal approaching fishing boats that had responded to the radio distress calls. A local fishing vessel reached Ribeiro approximately 8 minutes after the shark attack. However, the crew required careful maneuvering to extract him from the water without attracting further attention from the circling mako. The shark had inflicted multiple bite wounds on his calf and ankle, requiring immediate pressure bandages to control the blood loss during transport to shore. Ribeiro was rushed to the hospital, where emergency surgeons worked to repair the extensive soft tissue damage and prevent infection from the shark's bacteria-laden bite. Despite requiring multiple surgical procedures and months of physical rehabilitation, he eventually recovered full mobility in his leg. The incident prompted Brazilian paragliding authorities to implement new safety protocols, which require backup steering systems and improved emergency equipment for coastal flight. Margaret River, located in Western Australia's southwest region, had established itself as one of the world's premier surfing destinations by the early 2000s. The area's exposed coastline faces directly into the Southern Ocean, generating consistent swells that travel thousands of kilometers before reaching the rocky reefs and beach breaks scattered along the 40-kilometer stretch of coast. The region's surf breaks, carved by centuries of wave action against ancient limestone formations, created both world-class waves and complex underwater topography that attracted diverse marine life. The waters off Margaret River supported substantial populations of Australian salmon, tuna, and various ray species that served as primary food sources for tiger sharks migrating along the coast. These apex predators, identifiable by their distinctive striped patterns and broad heads, typically appear in the area during the autumn and winter months, as they follow the seasonal movements of their prey. Local surfers had long acknowledged the presence of these sharks, though encounters remained relatively uncommon given the vast expanse of available ocean territory. Nathan Clark, a 30-year-old professional surfer from Perth, had competed on the World Surf League Tour for 8 years before transitioning to a career in surf coaching and board design. His reputation for charging powerful waves in challenging conditions had earned him sponsorship deals with several major surf companies. However, he maintained his preference for solo dawn sessions when conditions aligned with his training schedule. On April 7, 2021, Clark drove to a secluded break 15 kilometers south of the main Margaret River township, seeking solitude for an intensive training session. Weather forecasts indicated optimal conditions with offshore winds, 2-meter swells, and clear skies, providing excellent visibility for analyzing his technique. The chosen location featured a shallow reef break that produced hollow, powerful waves but required precise positioning to avoid the sharp limestone formations beneath the surface. Clark entered the water at sunrise, paddling through the channel that provided safe passage to the lineup beyond the breaking waves. His custom-shaped surfboard, designed specifically for powerful reef breaks, measured 6 feet 4 inches in length with a narrow outline that enhanced speed and maneuverability in critical sections. The water temperature registered at 16 degrees Celsius, requiring a 4-millimeter wetsuit for extended sessions. The morning session progressed smoothly for the first hour, with Clark successfully riding multiple waves while refining his approach to the reef's more challenging sections. The swell direction and tide combination created ideal conditions for the type of steep, fast-breaking waves that had built his reputation as a barrel-riding specialist. His familiarity with the break allowed him to position himself precisely in relation to the reef's contours and the waves' breaking patterns. At approximately 7:30, as Clark paddled back toward the peak after completing a particularly long ride, he noticed unusual disturbances in the water near the main takeoff zone. Schools of smaller fish appeared to be fleeing the area, creating ripples and splashes that suggested the presence of a larger predator. However, such activity was not uncommon in the morning hours when various marine species engaged in feeding behaviors. Clark positioned himself for what he intended to be his final wave of the session, a solid 2-meter set that approached from the southwest. As he dropped into the wave face and began his bottom turn, the water beneath him erupted with shocking violence. A 13-foot tiger shark, estimated to weigh over 400 kilograms, surged upward from the deeper water adjacent to the reef. The shark's massive jaws snapped shut on the tail section of Clark's surfboard with crushing force, the impact throwing him forward into the wave's white water. The tiger shark's bite severed approximately 18 inches from the board's rear, including the fin setup and a portion of the fiberglass construction. Clark tumbled through the broken wave, his momentum carrying him across the sharp reef formations that scraped against his wetsuit and exposed skin. As Clark surfaced and attempted to regain his bearings, he realized that the shark had not departed but continued to circle the area while investigating the floating debris from the board. The predator's behavior suggested heightened interest in the unusual disturbance, possibly triggered by the vibrations and sounds created by the board's destruction. Clark faced the challenge of reaching safety while avoiding further confrontation with an agitated apex predator. The remaining portion of his surfboard provided limited flotation, forcing Clark to rely primarily on his swimming ability to reach the relative safety of the shallow reef area. However, movement through the water risked attracting additional attention from the circling tiger shark. Clark chose to minimize his motion while gradually working toward the reef's edge, using the available board fragments for support. The tiger shark made several additional passes around Clark's position, its distinctive broad head and striped pattern visible through the clear water. On one approach, the predator came within arm's reach, prompting Clark to use the broken board section as a barrier between himself and the shark's investigation. The confrontation continued for approximately 10 minutes before the shark lost interest and disappeared into deeper water. Clark successfully reached the reef's shallow margin, though the crossing had resulted in multiple lacerations across his torso and legs from contact with the sharp limestone formations. Blood from these wounds created additional concern about attracting other predators, motivating him to exit the water as quickly as conditions permitted. The swim to shore required 25 minutes of careful navigation through the reef system, during which Clark remained vigilant for any signs of returning sharks. Upon reaching the beach, he assessed his injuries and determined that while painful and bleeding, none required immediate emergency medical attention. Clark later described the encounter as a reminder that even familiar surf breaks could present unexpected dangers when apex predators appeared during routine sessions. Gansby, a small fishing town located on the southern coast of South Africa's Western Cape Province, had gained international recognition as one of the world's premier great white shark viewing destinations. The town's proximity to Dyer Island and the adjacent Geyser Rock seal colony created ideal hunting conditions for these apex predators, with the channel between the islands earning the nickname Shark Alley among local fishing communities and marine researchers. The area's unique marine ecosystem supported substantial populations of Cape fur seals, which served as primary prey for great white sharks migrating along the South African coast. These predators, some measuring over 6 meters in length, demonstrated sophisticated hunting behaviors in the relatively shallow waters surrounding the islands, often launching spectacular breaching attacks that had attracted researchers and filmmakers from around the world. Thomas Whitaker, a 48-year-old sailing enthusiast from Cape Town, had organized a recreational sailing expedition to observe marine wildlife in the waters off Gansby during February 2020. His 35-foot sailboat, equipped with modern navigation and safety equipment, provided an ideal platform for wildlife observation while maintaining the mobility necessary to avoid dangerous encounters with the area's apex predators. Joining Whitaker for the 3-day expedition were longtime sailing companions Marcus Lee, aged 36, Patricia Henley, 42, and David Kruger, 39. All four possessed extensive sailing experience and had completed similar wildlife viewing trips along the South African coast. However, none had previously ventured into the waters immediately surrounding Shark Alley during peak great white shark season. Weather conditions on February 14th appeared ideal for sailing, with light winds from the southeast providing comfortable sailing conditions while maintaining sufficient breeze to ensure responsive boat handling. Water visibility exceeded 15 meters, giving excellent opportunities for observing underwater wildlife through the boat's viewing windows, which are installed below the waterline. The group departed Gansby Harbor at dawn, following a predetermined route that would take them past the seal colonies while maintaining safe distances from the main predation zones where great white sharks typically hunted. Local marine authorities had provided current information about shark activity levels and recommended viewing areas that balanced wildlife observation opportunities with safety considerations. By mid-morning, the sailboat had reached a position approximately 2 kilometers southwest of Dyer Island, where the crew observed multiple seal colonies engaged in typical feeding and social behaviors. Great white sharks appeared intermittently in the surrounding waters, though their movements remained predictable and non-threatening to the sailing vessel positioned in deeper water beyond the main hunting grounds. At 11:30, as the crew prepared to adjust their course toward a different viewing area, Lee volunteered to secure a loose jib sheet that had been rattling against the mast. The line had worked free during a previous course change and required retying to prevent damage to the sail and rigging. Lee positioned himself near the port rail, leaning outboard to reach the problematic line while maintaining his grip on the boat's safety rails. The sailboat's position placed it directly above an underwater ridge, where great white sharks often patrolled, while searching for seal colonies moving between feeding areas. A 15-foot female great white, estimated to weigh over 2,000 kilograms, had been tracking the boat's movement from below, possibly attracted by the unusual sounds and vibrations transmitted through the water by the vessel's hull and rigging. Without warning, the massive predator launched itself from the water in a spectacular breach that brought its entire body above the ocean's surface. The shark struck the sailboat's port side with tremendous force, its momentum carrying it partially onto the deck while its jaws snapped shut on Lee's extended leg. The impact threw both Lee and the shark across the cockpit area, scattering sailing equipment and knocking Henley and Kruger off their feet. The great white's thrashing motion as it attempted to return to the water created additional chaos aboard the sailboat. Its powerful tail struck various pieces of deck equipment, while its jaws maintained their grip on Lee's leg, causing severe crushing injuries and deep lacerations that immediately began bleeding profusely. The shark's weight and violent movements threatened to capsize the relatively small sailing vessel. Whitaker immediately activated the boat's emergency radio while attempting to assist Lee, though the continuing presence of the agitated shark on deck prevented close approach. Kruger managed to grab a boat hook and began prodding the shark in an attempt to encourage it to release Lee and return to the water. However, the predator's disorientation and the unfamiliar environment of the boat deck appeared to increase its aggressive behavior. The attack's violence threw Henley overboard during the initial impact, forcing her to tread water while a massive, agitated great white shark thrashed on the boat above her position. She attempted to swim toward the stern, where the boat's ladder would allow her to re-enter the ship. Still, the shark's continued presence on deck and the blood entering the water created an extremely dangerous situation for anyone remaining in the ocean. After approximately 90 seconds of thrashing, the great white shark managed to work itself back toward the water, finally releasing Lee as it slid off the deck and disappeared beneath the surface. Lee, severely injured and losing blood rapidly, required immediate medical attention that exceeded the boat's first aid capabilities. His left leg showed extensive damage from the shark's bite, with multiple fractures and torn muscle tissue, requiring emergency surgical intervention. Whitaker succeeded in pulling Henley back aboard while Kruger applied pressure bandages to Lee's wounds, using the boat's emergency medical supplies. The nearest medical facility capable of handling such severe trauma was located in Cape Town, requiring a helicopter evacuation that would take 45 minutes to arrange and execute. Emergency rescue services responded within 20 minutes of Whitaker's distress call, dispatching both a helicopter and a marine rescue unit to the scene. Lee was successfully evacuated to Cape Town's trauma hospital, where surgeons worked for 6 hours to repair the extensive damage to his leg and restore circulation to the affected limb. Despite the severity of his injuries, Lee eventually regained full use of his leg after extensive rehabilitation. However, the incident ended his sailing activities in areas known for great white shark populations. The psychological impact of the attack affected all 4 crew members differently, with Henley experiencing recurring nightmares about being in the water while the shark attacked above her. Kruger developed a heightened awareness of marine wildlife that initially made him reluctant to return to offshore sailing. Whitaker's sailboat required extensive repairs to address the structural damage caused by the shark's impact and thrashing. The port rail needed complete replacement, while several deck fittings had been torn loose during the encounter. Insurance investigators spent weeks documenting the unusual nature of the claim, as great white shark attacks on recreational vessels remained extremely rare, even in South African waters. Marine biologists who investigated the incident suggested that the shark's breaching behavior represented a case of mistaken identity, with the sailboat's hull possibly resembling a seal when viewed from below. The attack location, directly above a known hunting corridor, placed the vessel in an area where great white sharks regularly demonstrated aggressive feeding behaviors. The Gansbai Harbor Authority subsequently implemented new guidelines requiring recreational boaters to maintain greater distances from seal colonies during peak shark activity periods. Local tour operators began providing more detailed briefings about shark behavior patterns and emergency procedures for private vessel operators visiting the area. The attack prompted local authorities to review safety recommendations for recreational boaters operating near seal colonies during peak predation periods. On August 12, 2025, the sun was setting over the calm waters near Savusavu, Fiji. Tessa Langley, a 28-year-old student studying ocean science, was getting ready for another dive. She had spent years learning about marine animals and coral habitats. Her love for the ocean began as a child, when she would collect shells on the beach near her hometown. Now she was focused on studying fish patterns in deep reef areas. Tessa was not new to the water. She had trained hard, practiced breath control, and understood the dangers that could appear on the open sea. Her dives were part of a long project for her school. That evening, she wanted to explore a rocky reef before the light disappeared. Tessa entered the sea with smooth, slow movements. Her breathing was calm, her body relaxed. The sky above turned orange and pink as the light faded. She moved deeper into the blue, where fish darted between coral walls. Strong water currents made it hard to stay steady. The reef below was quiet and dark, and she floated alone, writing notes on her small underwater pad. Around her, the water looked empty. But in the shadows, something large moved closer. Without a sound, a hammerhead shark rushed toward her. It came fast from the side. The wide head and tall dorsal fin cut through the water. Tessa did not see it until it hit her. The impact knocked her hard. Sharp teeth closed on her upper leg. The pain was sudden. Her wetsuit tore and her muscles burned. Bubbles shot around her as she twisted and turned. Trying to get away, she kicked and hit with her arms, each move sending streaks of red into the sea. The water grew thick with blood. The shark let go, confused by the cloud. Tessa did not wait. She swam upward, her lungs burning. Every stroke felt harder. The surface looked far. Her body ached. She kept going, fighting through the darkness and pushing toward the light. Behind her, the shark circled but did not strike again. It stayed close, swimming in wide loops, while Tessa climbed higher through the deep blue. Her hands broke the surface at last. She gasped for air. Her leg throbbed, deep cuts spilling blood into the sea around her. Dive workers on a nearby boat saw her and rushed over. They helped her out of the water and laid her down. Her suit was ripped and her skin was scratched and bruised. The shark had left deep marks across her thigh, but her spirit stayed strong. Tessa held onto the side of the boat, eyes wide, chest rising fast. Around her, the sea looked calm again, as if nothing had happened. But those minutes had changed everything. The ocean had shown a new face, wild, sharp, and fast. Her dive had started with science and curiosity. It ended with pain and fear, and the night was just beginning. Tessa lay on the deck as the boat raced toward the shore. Her head rested on a towel, and her eyes stared at the fading sky. The pain in her leg grew with each wave that rocked the boat. The injury was deep, and blood soaked through the fabric wrapped around it. One of the local dive helpers held her hand while another used his phone to call for urgent care. Though her mind was cloudy, she stayed awake, knowing she had to reach land before she lost too much strength. As they neared the coast, lights from the small clinic began to shine through the trees. A group of medics waited on the dock, ready with a stretcher. The helpers lifted Tessa from the boat and passed her carefully into their arms. Her face was pale, her breathing fast. Inside the treatment room, nurses cleaned the torn skin and stopped the bleeding. The wound stretched across her thigh with ugly marks. Some of the muscle was torn. She needed many stitches and strong medicine to stop the pain. After a long time, her pulse returned to normal. News of the event spread quickly. The dive guides were shocked. Most of them had worked in the area for years but had never seen anything like it. Hammerhead sharks were known to swim close to reefs, but attacks on swimmers were rare. People said the low light and fast water might have confused the animal. They said maybe the shark thought Tessa was something else, or that it felt surprised and reacted with force. No one could say for sure, but many divers began to speak about being more careful at dusk. Tessa had to rest for weeks. Her school helped her take time away from her studies. She stayed in a small room near the sea where she could hear waves at night. The wound healed slowly. A large scar formed across her leg. She walked with care at first. The bite had changed her body, but not her heart. Her notes from that dive were lost, but the memory stayed clear in her mind. She often looked out at the reef from a bench on the hill, thinking about the strike and how fast it happened. Doctors said she was lucky. The shark had missed important veins and bones. If it had held on longer, the harm could have been worse. Some said she had stayed too long in the water, but others called her brave for surviving. Her story spread in the diving world. It served as a reminder that the ocean holds both beauty and danger. Later that year, signs were placed near the reef warning about low visibility times. New safety rules were shared with tourists, and though many returned to the water, few forgot the night when shadows moved too fast. Tessa did not stop loving the sea, but she now looked at it with new eyes, full of care, wonder, and deep respect. On April 12, 2025, the sea off Gansby moved with quiet waves under the soft light of early evening. A private yacht floated on the blue water, holding a small group of travelers. Among them was 35-year-old Oliver Strauss, a businessman known for his calm voice and love for ocean trips. His wife, 33-year-old Leela, sat nearby. She was gentle and thoughtful, often quiet in crowds. The couple had been married for 6 years. They lived in Cape Town but liked to escape to peaceful waters when life grew tense. On this day, they had invited a few friends to join them for a break, away from the city noise. The boat had food and music. Some sat in the back chatting softly. Others leaned on the rail, looking for sea life. Lila stood near the edge, watching the waves. The wind carried sounds between her and Oliver, who had begun to raise his voice. Their talk grew sharp. No one heard exactly what was said, but people turned when they saw sudden movement. Without warning, Oliver pushed Lila off the boat. Her body hit the water with a loud splash. The area was known for large marine creatures. Fast-moving currents carried strong scents across the sea. Lila splashed and tried to float, but the waves pulled at her. Beneath the surface, a massive shape moved. A great white shark almost 16 feet long had felt the vibrations. It rushed from the deep and struck quickly. Its jaws clamped around her leg and arm. The impact sent her spinning. The water turned red as she kicked and tried to twist free. The creature dove deeper, dragging her down. The people on the yacht shouted. Someone threw a rope, another tossed a life ring. A man even jumped halfway into the water holding a long stick. But the animal did not let go. It turned under the waves, still pulling her lower. Lila fought desperately, but the shark's strength was overwhelming. The sea swallowed them again and again, and each time she resurfaced, her strength seemed to fade. After a long and horrible struggle, the shark finally let go. Lila's body floated up, motionless. A lifeguard from a nearby support boat arrived. They pulled her out, her limbs torn and her skin pale. Blood soaked the towel wrapped around her. Her eyes were closed and her chest did not rise. A helicopter landed on a nearby platform. She was lifted on a stretcher and flown toward help. The ride was fast, but her injuries were too serious. Back on the yacht, everyone stood in silence. The music had stopped. The air had grown cold. Oliver sat alone, his hands shaking. The event had changed the night from peaceful to tragic in seconds. The boat turned toward the shore, its passengers lost in quiet fear, not knowing yet how the full story would unfold once they reached land. As the yacht approached the harbor, flashing lights met the group. Emergency workers moved quickly, preparing for the worst. The news of the sea incident had spread fast. At the hospital, doctors tried to fight against time. They worked in silence, knowing the odds were low. The body had lost too much. The damage was too wide. Within minutes, the efforts stopped. A voice confirmed what most feared. Lila could not be saved. The wounds had gone too deep. The pain was too great for her to return. Word reached the boat while it was still docking. People stood still, not speaking. Some cried quietly. A few held their heads in their hands. The air was heavy, filled with shock. What had begun as a peaceful sail now ended with grief. What followed was not calm. Officers waited at the pier. They looked at each guest, asking what they had seen. The focus quickly turned to Oliver. His hands shook again. He answered their questions, but doubt filled the space around him. Later, he sat alone in a small room, lights above his head, voices around him asking about the push. Each moment was looked at again. Each sound, each step, each glance at the boat was written down. The story started to take shape. Friends gave different versions. One said it looked like an accident. Another thought it seemed too fast to be a slip. Yet another believed the push came after sharp words. The mystery began to grow. News reporters arrived the next morning. Cameras filmed the water where it had happened. Images of the yacht filled the screens. Headlines spoke of danger, not only from sharks, but from human choices. People online shared strong thoughts. Some blamed carelessness. Others asked how such a place could become deadly. The story sparked wide discussion. Experts warned again about sea creatures in known hot zones. But this time it was not just about nature, it was also about trust between people. A few days later, a small group gathered on the shore to say goodbye. Flowers floated on the tide, moving slowly away. The sea that once brought peace now held sad memories. Lila's family stood close, holding hands, watching the waves. Back in the city, legal steps were underway, records were gathered, statements were printed. Questions about Oliver's role stayed loud. Was it a mistake? Was it done in anger? Did he think she would be safe? Only he knew the full answer, but many were now looking for the truth. What stayed in every heart was how fast things had changed. 1 second of action led to a loss. One sudden moment took a life. The ocean, wide and deep, had shown once again that it held power beyond control. And this time the pain it carried had come from above the surface, not just below. The waters off Port Elizabeth carried a reputation for danger, not just from storms that could rise without warning, but from the silent predators that ruled beneath the waves. On June 3, 2022, a discovery shocked even the most hardened locals. This grim event began with what seemed like a routine day of fishing, but ended with a revelation that unsettled everyone who heard it. The fishermen had set out early, their nets cast wide as they moved slowly through the cool waters, which shifted with the strong coastal currents. Their work was steady until one net drew tight in a way that did not feel like the usual catch of fish or tangled debris. When the massive shape finally surfaced, they realized they had trapped something far larger than they had ever encountered. A colossal great white shark that stretched an almost unbelievable 22 feet in length, its bulk thrashing with violent force against the mesh as the crew scrambled to secure it. As they worked to free the giant predator, one of the deckhands noticed something strange lodged along the shark's lower jawline, a flash of unnatural color that did not belong in the slick gray of the animal's flesh, or the white churn of the sea around it. When he leaned closer, he saw a strip of brightly colored fabric twisted together with the broken strap of a diving fin. That single detail shifted the mood on deck, for everyone knew that only days earlier 2 European snorkelers had disappeared along the same stretch of coast, their absence already under investigation by local authorities who feared the worst yet still held faint hope that they might be found alive. The shark's capture was immediately reported, and soon the vessel returned to shore under escort, its grim cargo drawing attention as news spread quickly through the community that something terrible had likely been uncovered. The carcass was secured for examination, and the necropsy carried out by marine experts revealed the full horror. When the stomach cavity was opened, it was clear that the animal had consumed more than fish, for inside lay the partially digested remains of a man and woman. The fragments of their bodies mingled with torn wetsuit fabric, pieces of gear, and the cracked shell of a waterproof camera that had somehow remained intact despite the shark's powerful jaws and corrosive digestive acids. The revelation left no doubt about the fate of the missing snorkelers, their disappearance explained in a way that silenced speculation and replaced uncertainty with grief. The condition of the remains told a story as well, with experts noting that the shark had likely struck in shallow water, taking advantage of its ability to surge upward with astonishing speed to drag both victims under before they had time to react. This strategy made escape nearly impossible once its jaws had closed around them. The great white's size only added to the terror of imagining the attack, for a predator of 22 feet could overpower divers with ease, pulling them beneath the surface in seconds and consuming them in a frenzy that left little behind. Investigators pieced together the timeline, noting that the couple had last been seen near a reef close to shore, where visibility was low and baitfish often gathered, conditions that could attract a hunting shark of unusual size. With no witnesses to the actual attack, the evidence inside the animal became the only testimony, and the presence of the fabric and gear wedged in its teeth had acted like a grim calling card that led authorities directly to the truth. Locals reacted with a mix of sorrow and unease, for although shark attacks were rare, the sheer scale and brutality of this one forced them to confront the reality that the ocean they lived beside could still conceal dangers beyond their control. Fishermen who had spent their lives on the water admitted that they had never seen a predator of such size in those waters, and even the scientists who studied sharks in the region acknowledged that the specimen was exceptional in both length and the violence it represented. The waterproof camera, though damaged beyond repair, was collected along with the other fragments as part of the official record, a haunting reminder of how quickly the ocean had turned deadly for the pair who had entered it with excitement and trust only days earlier. For their families, the confirmation brought both closure and devastation, ending the uncertainty, but leaving them with images too terrible to put into words. The community spoke quietly about how fate had led the fishermen to that exact catch, for without the accidental netting of the giant predator, the disappearance of the snorkelers might have remained a mystery, their bodies lost forever to the depths. Instead, the shark itself had carried the answer, its swollen stomach holding the evidence that explained everything, and the clue caught in its jaw ensured that the truth would not be overlooked. In the days that followed, the event lingered in conversation. A chilling tale passed among locals and carried by news outlets far beyond South Africa, for the image of a 22-foot shark containing the remains of two people was too stark to forget. Experts urged caution, but reminded the public that while attacks were uncommon, the ocean was never without risk, and large predators sometimes ventured closer to shore than expected, especially during seasons when prey fish were abundant. For those who lived along the coast, the memory of June 2022 stayed vivid, a reminder of how swiftly beauty and danger could merge in the sea, and how the thin strip of fabric and broken fin strap that first caught a deckhand's eye had led step by step to the discovery of a tragedy that would not soon be forgotten. The waters off Gansby had long been a magnet for those fascinated by the world's most feared predator, the great white shark. On August 20th, 2025, three friends from Berlin discovered, in the most harrowing way possible, that the thrill of being close to these creatures could turn in an instant into a fight for survival. Marcus Vogel, Daniel Kramer, and Jonas Richter had chartered a sleek yacht for an afternoon cruise, their plan a mix of leisure and excitement, a final shared adventure before returning to their separate lives back in Germany. The sun hung bright above the South African coast, the sea calm with a glassy sheen that seemed harmless, but beneath that surface moved the kind of power that few ever encountered directly and lived to describe. The yacht cut smoothly through the swells, its deck crew attending to the equipment while the three friends leaned against the stern, laughing, pointing out seabirds, and marveling at the sense of freedom that came with being far from shore. Gansby's reputation as a hotspot for great whites was something they all knew. Still, with the bulk of their trip intended as sightseeing rather than cage diving, the thought of danger seemed distant, as though the predators existed more as symbols than as immediate threats. That illusion was shattered without warning when the ocean itself seemed to erupt in violence. From beneath the calm surface, a massive 20-foot great white surged upward and rammed the yacht's hull with terrifying force. The stern ladder splintered on impact, chunks of metal torn loose as the vessel rocked violently to one side, the shock of the strike enough to throw all three men off balance and hurl them into the sea. One moment, they were secure on deck. The next, they were plunging into cold water, disoriented and panicked, as the vast shadow of the shark wheeled back toward them. The predator struck again almost immediately, its body whipping forward with a burst of speed that displaced the water in a surge of spray, its jaws closing around Marcus's leg in a crushing bite that pierced through muscle and bone with ease. The pain was immediate and blinding, his scream muffled by seawater as blood poured into the waves around him, a crimson cloud that spread quickly through the blue. The shark shook once, wrenching him sideways with a violent twist before releasing, its teeth leaving deep arcs of destruction that rendered his leg barely functional. Daniel, just feet away, saw the predator wheel past him, and in a desperate act of defiance, he kicked furiously at its flank, striking out in raw panic as he tried to drive the animal back. The shark snapped at the motion, its jaws grazing across his thigh in a glancing strike that opened long, bloody gashes without locking down. The force of that single brush sent him spinning backward in the water, pain radiating through his body as he struggled to regain orientation. Jonas surfaced nearby, his arm torn and bleeding after the shark brushed past him with jaws half open, the teeth carving deep gashes as though even incidental contact could maim. The sight of his own blood mingling with that of his friends nearly froze him in shock, his survival instinct overwhelmed by the sheer speed and brutality of the predator that now circled them. On deck, the crew reacted instantly, the chaos of shouting and movement filling the air as they hurled ropes over the side and struck the water with poles in a desperate effort to distract the shark and give the men a chance to escape. The predator circled back, drawn again by the scent of blood, its dorsal fin cutting a stark line through the waves as it turned with relentless precision toward the thrashing survivors. Every second stretched with unbearable tension as Marcus flailed in agony. Daniel kicked wildly to stay afloat, and Jonas fought to keep his injured arm above the surface, the three of them locked in the knowledge that one more strike could be final. The crew hammered poles against the water, the reverberations carrying through the sea, and with sudden unpredictability the shark veered off, turning away in a wide arc as though momentarily deterred by the sudden disturbance. Its massive shape slipped beneath the waves, vanishing from sight in the same abrupt way it had appeared, leaving only the wide stain of blood and the panicked gasps of the survivors to mark the violence that had just unfolded. The ropes became lifelines hauled taut as the crew dragged the battered men one by one back toward the safety of the yacht. Marcus's leg hung limp, blood pumping steadily from the mangled flesh as his pale face betrayed shock and near collapse. Daniel's thigh gushed blood in long ribbons as he fought to climb the ladder, every movement strained by pain, while Jonas clung with his uninjured arm, his strength nearly gone as he was pulled across the stern and collapsed against the deck. They lay together on the boards, shivering and gasping, their bodies torn and their minds numbed by the realization that the attack had lasted only minutes, yet had nearly ended all three of their lives. The deck beneath them became smeared with blood as the crew worked frantically to stem the flow from their wounds, the men clutching at each other not just for physical support, but for the shared recognition of how narrowly they had escaped being dragged beneath the surface for good. The sea around the yacht remained deceptively calm once the predator was gone, its surface rolling gently as though nothing had happened. Still, for those aboard, the illusion of safety had been shattered forever. The 20-foot shark had revealed the fragile line between leisure and terror, between a routine day on the water and the sudden arrival of death in the form of a predator that had ruled those seas for millions of years. For Marcus, Daniel, and Jonas, the memory would be carried in scars both physical and emotional, reminders etched into their bodies and minds of the moment when a calm afternoon turned into a desperate fight for survival. Their return to the yacht had not been a triumph but a reprieve, a narrow margin of luck and quick action that separated them from becoming the next names lost to the sea off Gansby, where great whites patrolled in numbers and size that few could fully comprehend. The night was heavy with humidity on April 6, 2023, and the coastal inlets near the Panama Canal carried only the soft splash of Raul Mendoza's skiff as it drifted along the shallow, brackish channels, a place where he had fished countless times before, confident in his skill and comfort on the water. The faint glow of lanterns and the steady rhythm of water lapping against the hull created an atmosphere of routine. Still, in those same dark waters, a predator was moving unseen, drawn by the splashes and the faint scent of baitfish that Raul had been checking, a shadow cutting silently beneath the surface. At the same time, the fisherman went about his work unaware of the danger that was closing in. Raul leaned over to check a line when the water seemed to explode beneath him, a sudden eruption of force that sent a shock through his body before pain ignited in his leg. The jaws of a massive bull shark clamping onto his calf in a brutal grip that crushed down with terrifying strength. In an instant he was yanked over the side, the lantern light flashing briefly across the white of the shark's underbelly before darkness swallowed them both, pulling him beneath the surface into the murk and the sand-strewn bottom where the predator thrashed with him like a rag doll. His lungs screamed as salt water rushed into his mouth, and his hands clawed instinctively at the shark's rough skin, his grip slipping against the sandpaper hide that only cut deeper into his palms as the shark shook and dragged him further. In the chaos, Raul's instincts took over, and though his leg was locked in the crushing bite, he swung wildly with the boat hook that he had managed to hold onto as he was dragged under. Each strike was desperate, more for survival than precision, the heavy metal tip scraping and jabbing against the predator's flank, the vibrations carrying through the water. At the same time, the shark's body twisted with terrifying bursts of power. The grip on his leg felt unbreakable, the pull against his body so overwhelming that he feared at any moment he would be torn apart. Yet he fought on, thrashing and forcing his body to move despite the panic flooding his chest. Above, his friends had heard the eruption of water and the muffled cry that followed, and their panic erupted as they rushed to the shoreline, lanterns swinging wildly in their hands as they shouted his name into the night. The black water revealed nothing but violent ripples, the surface broken by flashes of movement that told them something massive was beneath. In desperation, they hurled their lanterns into the waves, the sudden bursts of flame and sizzling glass lighting up the shallows in brief yellow flickers that illuminated the turmoil below. The shark's massive shape passed through the glow, a dark form that dwarfed Raoul as he struggled, and for the first time his friends understood the scale of what had him in its grip. The predator reacted to the sudden disruption, loosening its bite just enough that Raoul tore himself free, blood streaming from deep lacerations that turned the water into a clouded haze of red and black as he forced himself upward. His chest burned, his body heavy, but survival pushed him through the water as he clawed toward the skiff, gasping as he broke the surface with a ragged cry. His hands scrambled across the wooden edge, slippery with blood, and he hauled himself up with strength born purely of fear, collapsing onto the deck with his leg twisted and mangled from the crushing force of the shark's jaws. The bull shark circled just beneath the surface, its dorsal fin slicing briefly through the lantern-lit ripples, its presence a reminder that the danger had not passed, that it could return at any moment to finish what it had started. His friends shouted again, waving their arms and throwing debris into the water, anything to keep the predator's focus away from the wounded man sprawled in his boat. The shark lingered for long seconds, shadowing the skiff in the shallow water before finally turning and disappearing into the darkness of the inlet, leaving only silence and the faint rocking of waves as its massive body slipped away unseen. On the deck, Raoul lay gasping, every muscle trembling, his hands pressed tight against the shredded flesh of his calf where blood pulsed steadily between his fingers. His face was pale in the lantern light, his breathing ragged, yet his eyes were open, locked on the water as if he expected the predator to surge up again and drag him back beneath the surface. His friends scrambled aboard, their voices cracking with panic as they tried to stop the bleeding with torn pieces of cloth, the skiff rocking under their frantic movements as they pushed it back toward shore, their eyes never leaving the dark water that trailed beside them. When they reached land, medics rushed to stabilize him, the deep gashes revealing muscle and torn tendons, the wounds described later as consistent with the crushing power of a bull shark's jaws. Even as they treated him, Raoul's body shook with shock, his mind replaying the moment of impact again and again, the way the water had opened beneath him and the jaws had clamped down without warning. The sheer speed of the attack, leaving him no chance to react until he was already being dragged under. He had fished those waters for years, trusted his knowledge of the tides and the channels. Yet none of it had prepared him for the raw force of the predator that claimed those inlets as its hunting ground. Experts who reviewed the incident later explained that bull sharks were among the most aggressive of shark species, their ability to thrive in both salt and brackish water, making them particularly dangerous in areas where fishermen often worked close to shore. They described their attacks as sudden and territorial, usually triggered without warning by splashing or the faint scent of blood in the water. And Raoul's case was a chilling reminder of how quickly routine could turn to disaster when darkness masked a predator's approach. On August 8, 2025, the vast waters off the coast of South Africa seemed deceptively calm as a luxury 45-foot catamaran sliced through the waves, its sails full of steady wind, carrying 6 European friends who had come to celebrate their reunion with a voyage they believed would etch itself into memory for all the right reasons. The vessel was modern and sleek, designed for comfort and leisure rather than endurance against treachery. Yet the group, full of laughter and confidence, felt only the pull of the horizon and the thrill of freedom as the coastline stretched farther behind them. The sea, however, always carried its own secrets, and below the glittering surface lay an unseen reef waiting with merciless indifference. Without warning, the catamaran struck the submerged rocks, the sharp rise of coral and stone tearing through fiberglass with a grinding roar that seemed to split the air itself, and in an instant, the proud vessel lurched violently to the side, throwing its passengers off balance as water rushed through the ruptured hull with unstoppable force. The friends had no time to react, no chance to steady themselves, as the catamaran capsized with a sickening roll that sent bodies, gear, and shattered pieces of railing tumbling into the freezing, turbulent water. In moments, the world had inverted. What was once the deck now trapped beneath the surface. and the 6 survivors found themselves scattered, gasping and thrashing against the pull of waves that showed no mercy. Panic seized them as the cold bit into their skin, stealing warmth and clarity with every passing second, and the sea turned from playground to enemy as broken shards of their vessel floated like ghosts among them. Some grasped desperately for life jackets while others clung to the jagged remnants of wood and fiberglass, their cries swallowed by the wind and spray. The ocean, restless and relentless, seemed intent on keeping them there, drifting helplessly in open water. But what came next would transform fear into terror. The thrashing of limbs, the frantic splashing, and the blood already leaking from small cuts and scrapes acted as a summons to something older and far deadlier than human despair. And soon a shadow emerged beneath the surface, vast and purposeful, circling with silent menace. A great white shark, 16 feet in length and drawn by instincts honed over millions of years, closed the distance, its massive frame cutting unseen arcs around the desperate swimmers. For long, breathless moments the survivors felt only unease, a presence they could not yet name, before the truth revealed itself in a flash of pale belly and the sudden slicing fin that broke the surface only yards away. The predator struck with terrifying speed, its bulk rising from below in an explosion of foam as jaws armed with serrated teeth clamped down on the leg of one of the men, dragging him under in a violent thrash that painted the water red. His friends screamed in horror as the sea boiled with movement, and though he surfaced again, gasping and bleeding, the shark returned with relentless focus, tearing at him before shifting toward the others who kicked desperately to escape. Another man was seized by the arm, the crushing power of the bite-breaking bone and rending flesh, and the group splintered into chaos, each stroke a fight not only against the waves but against the certainty of death circling closer. 4 of them were injured within minutes, their wounds deep and spilling into the water, and the survivors could do nothing but endure the horror of snapping jaws that seemed to come from every direction. The shark circled back again and again, sometimes passing so close that its rough hide brushed their legs, other times diving deep before surging upward with a force that reminded them they were powerless in its world. The sea became a stage for terror where each second stretched unbearably long, and the friends clung to debris not as comfort, but as a fragile barrier between themselves and the creature that waited just beyond sight. 2 of them managed to grasp a broken railing that floated stubbornly above the waves, its jagged edge digging into their skin but keeping their torsos lifted above the waterline. And alongside them, a pair of half-inflated life jackets provided just enough buoyancy to create a fragile refuge. They watched with wide, unblinking eyes as the shark lunged again at their injured companions, who thrashed weakly, trying to keep blood from flowing too freely but unable to escape the predator's interest. Hours passed like lifetimes as the wounded drifted in and out of consciousness, their bodies pale from cold and loss, while the others remained locked in the torturous rhythm of anticipation. Every brush of kelp or slap of wave a cruel reminder that the shark was never gone, only waiting. Time stretched mercilessly, the sun climbing across the sky as the salt burned their wounds and their strength bled into the sea. The water rocked them with indifference, carrying them farther from land while the shark remained a constant shadow, its dorsal fin occasionally slicing the surface, as if to remind them that survival was not promised, but fought for second by second. They shivered violently, their muscles seizing, yet still they held to the debris, refusing to surrender despite the agony that pressed down on their chests and the cold that seeped into their bones. At last, when the horizon seemed empty of hope, a faint engine hum broke through the wind, and a rescue boat appeared as a speck that grew slowly but unmistakably larger, cutting through the swells with determined speed. The sight ignited a desperate surge of strength in the survivors, who raised trembling arms, clinging still to their makeshift rafts even as the shark circled one final time beneath them. The rescuers hauled them aboard, their bodies limp and heavy with exhaustion, blood trailing from deep lacerations that would scar them forever. Yet they were alive, carried from the nightmare sea into the frantic care of hands that pressed bandages and checked pulses. In the hospital hours later, doctors treated wounds with practiced urgency, stitching torn flesh and steadying hearts that beat too fast from fear, while the survivors lay wrapped in blankets, their eyes still wide with the memory of teeth and water. They would recount how the weight of the ocean pressed them down, how the snapping jaws closed so near their faces they felt the spray of salt and blood, and how only the stubborn will to cling to debris kept them from slipping beneath the surface. The summer of 2018, the waters off Monterey Bay glistened beneath a pale sky as the morning fog thinned to reveal a coastline where cliffs met restless waves, and it was there that lifeguard Mateo Alvarez carried out his patrol duties, scanning the currents with the sharp awareness built from years of training and countless rescues. The beaches attracted crowds of tourists during the season, but Mateo's attention was drawn away from swimmers that day when word reached him of a stranded seal pup struggling near a cluster of rocks just beyond the surf line, its cries thin and desperate as it flailed against the pull of the tide. Alongside him was Emily Chen, a visitor who had been walking the shore and noticed the animal's plight, and together they moved toward the water, believing it to be a straightforward rescue of vulnerable wildlife in distress. Neither of them knew that beneath the cold depths a predator far larger and more dangerous than the struggling pup had already closed in, drawn by instincts sharpened over ages of survival. Mateo was accustomed to risk, yet as he slipped into the wetsuit and pushed through the shallows, he felt only a surge of responsibility, not fear for the task ahead. And Emily followed cautiously with determination, convinced that saving the small creature was worth the discomfort of the icy water. The waves slapped against them as they edged farther from shore, the rocks jutting like dark teeth just beyond reach, and the pup's movements grew more frantic, its small body twisting against foam and current as if sensing what loomed unseen below. Mateo guided Emily around a floating mass of kelp, his body strong against the drag of the tide. But the bay was vast and indifferent, and each stroke carried them deeper into the hunting grounds of something they could neither see nor anticipate. From below, the 15-foot great white shark had already fixed upon the vibrations of the distressed pup, its massive body gliding silently through the shifting green of the cold Pacific, its eyes black and unblinking as it approached with calculated precision. The humans above, their legs kicking and arms slicing water in erratic splashes, had now added to the signals flooding its senses, and in moments instinct blurred target and prey, driving it upward with the raw surge of muscle and hunger. The first pass came without warning, a sudden eruption of power as the shark's bulk burst through the surface, jaws agape with rows of serrated teeth snapping so close to Mateo that the force of displaced water threw him backward, ripping the fabric of his wetsuit open across the chest and grazing flesh beneath. The sound of bone and muscle clamping shut reverberated through the water as he gasped, and in the same violent surge, the predator brushed past Emily, its sheer mass striking her with enough force to leave dark bruises spreading along her arm, even without the full weight of a bite. Panic crashed over them both as realization struck that they were no longer rescuers of a helpless pup but intruders in the path of an apex predator that had risen to claim its meal. Mateo's training took hold in the blur of terror, his eyes scanning frantically for anything that might form a barrier between themselves and the shark, and his hands closed on a splintered piece of floating debris, likely torn from a small boat or dock, the rough wood barely buoyant yet solid enough to form a shield. He thrust it between them and the predator, pressing Emily closer to his side as the shark circled back, the fins slicing across the surface in wide arcs that spoke of patience rather than haste. Each pass tightened the circle, the predator testing, waiting for weakness, lunging at the splashes of arms and feet with jaws that snapped shut on empty water only feet away. The cold seeped deeper with every passing minute, numbing limbs and stealing strength, turning each stroke into an effort that drained rather than carried them forward. Yet still, Mateo pressed toward the distant outline of the rescue boat now cutting across the waves, summoned by the commotion. The shark lunged again, its head rising in a violent snap at the plank. Mateo shoved outward, the impact rattling through his bones as the wood splintered but held long enough to redirect the jaws. Foam frothed around them, the sheer size of the creature dwarfing their own bodies, and the terror of being nothing more than flailing figures in its element bore down heavier than the weight of water itself. Emily's breathing grew ragged as she kicked weakly, her eyes locked on the dark shadow that passed beneath them again and again, sometimes so close she could see the scars along its rough hide and the ghostly reflection of light across its flank. Mateo, muscles burning and chest heaving, kept the plank pressed outward, shoving against currents that seemed determined to push them off course, each movement measured against the knowledge that fatigue was as deadly as teeth. The seal pup's cries had faded, lost to the deeper water, but the predator had shifted focus entirely, each snap of its jaws aimed now at the humans who dared remain afloat. The minutes stretched unbearably, time marked not by calm but by the rhythm of the shark's passes and the growing ache in their bodies as they fought exhaustion. The boat drew closer, but the final stretch felt endless, each meter bought with the weight of fear and the determination to keep moving despite muscles that screamed for rest. At last, the rescue crew leaned over, ropes cast and hands reaching, and Mateo thrust Emily upward, the wooden plank tumbling away as the shark lunged one final time beneath them, its massive head breaking the surface with jaws snapping shut on empty air, Emily was pulled aboard first, her body trembling with shock as bruises spread across her arm, and Matteo followed, dragged over the gunwale with blood seeping from the torn fabric across his chest, where the first near miss had left him marked. Below, the shark circled once more before descending into the depths, vanishing into the green darkness as swiftly as it had come, leaving only the churn of waves and the stench of salt and fear in its wake. Wrapped in blankets, their breath still ragged, the two sat in silence as the boat turned back toward shore. Each glance at the water served as a reminder of the vast predator they had narrowly escaped. In the hours that followed, doctors would tend to their wounds, bandaging torn skin and easing bruised muscle. But no treatment could erase the memory of jaws snapping close enough to taste the salt spray, or the certainty that survival had been balanced on moments and inches. The South African coastline near Gansbaai had long carried a reputation that hovered somewhere between awe and fear, a stretch of water known for its breathtaking beauty, but also for the powerful predators that patrolled its depths. In 2023, adventure kayaker Sophia Jensen set out alone along this rugged coast, drawn by the challenge and the solitude of paddling through one of the most unforgiving marine environments on Earth. Her early morning launch from a quiet beach was meant to give her time to cover distance before winds picked up, and for a while, the sea seemed to cooperate, rolling beneath her small craft in steady swells. She moved with calm determination, her paddle dipping rhythmically, her eyes tracing the jagged cliffs and outcrops that bordered the turbulent Atlantic. By mid-morning, conditions shifted. The water grew rougher, choppy swells slamming against the hull, and the sky darkened slightly as wind pressed down from the shoreline. She adjusted her course, edging closer to a rocky formation she knew well from maps and local warnings. Kayakers were advised to avoid such zones in heavy seas, but Sophia had always pushed boundaries, confident in her strength and skill. Out there, she was alone with the sound of the crashing surf and the raw, unbroken horizon. Every paddle stroke both a test and a declaration of independence. When search teams later pieced together the day's events, no one could say with certainty what had triggered the disaster. But evidence suggested that somewhere near the outcrop, a sudden surge of water, amplified by wind and tide, may have rolled her kayak. The small craft was later found overturned and drifting, scarred from collisions with stone. Whether Sophia had managed to cling to it or was separated immediately would remain unknown. But in that moment of chaos, she was at her most vulnerable. The waters near Gansbaai are notorious for one reason above all: great white sharks. They thrive along the drop-offs and hunting grounds where seals gather, their massive silhouettes cutting silently through the cold, nutrient-rich currents. For decades, researchers and thrill-seekers alike had come to this stretch of coast to witness these apex predators, yet few could imagine the speed and finality with which one could strike. For Sophia, capsized and exposed, the risk was immediate. Days later, after an exhaustive search hampered by heavy swells, her body was still missing. The only trace the search teams had was her kayak, discovered floating upside down near the outcrop, battered by waves. Hope faded quickly, replaced by grim resignation. Then came the call from a commercial fishing crew operating 2 miles offshore. Their nets had caught something massive, a great white shark measuring nearly 20 feet long. When authorities arrived to inspect, their discovery sent a chill across the community. Inside the stomach of the predator, they found human remains, later confirmed as belonging to Sophia. The revelation was both horrifying and final. Experts examining the evidence believed the sequence of events was tragically straightforward. Sophia's capsize, whether sudden or drawn out, left her struggling in turbulent waters. Separated from her kayak or clinging weakly to it, she would have been splashing at the surface, vulnerable and exposed in the very environment where great whites excel at detecting movement. For an animal built to hunt swiftly and decisively, the opportunity was one it did not ignore. The strike was believed to have been powerful and overwhelming, a moment in which survival would have been virtually impossible. To those who studied sharks, the tragedy was not framed as an act of malice, but of instinct. Great whites patrol hunting grounds with precision, guided by senses tuned over millions of years to detect prey and distress. To them, a lone human struggling in rough seas presented no difference from a seal or other marine animal. Yet for the people on shore, for the rescuers and her grieving loved ones, the distinction did little to soften the loss. In the aftermath, local authorities renewed their warnings about solitary water activities in predator-rich waters. Gansbaai had long attracted divers, kayakers, and thrill-seekers eager to test themselves in its notorious conditions, but Sophia's death underscored the brutal reality of such choices. Even the most skilled athlete could be undone by a sudden capsize, a shift in weather, or the silent approach of a predator that no amount of preparation could fully anticipate. For days, the story echoed through the coastal towns. Fishermen spoke in hushed tones about the size of the shark, its immense girth and power, a reminder of how insignificant a lone human could be in such a domain. Rescue officials described the difficulty of searching in pounding surf, their boats rocked by the same swells that had likely overturned her kayak. To them, the ocean had felt both endless and impenetrable, a force that swallowed efforts and returned little. What lingered most, however, was the image of a single kayaker venturing into waters where strength, skill, and spirit might still be eclipsed by raw, natural power. Sophia had embraced the freedom of the sea, but freedom in such places came with risk written into every wave and current. Her end was a stark reminder of how quickly adventure could cross into peril when conditions aligned against survival. In Gansbai, the sea has always belonged first to its predators, and in 2023, it claimed another life, in a manner as swift as it was merciless. Byron Bay, located on the easternmost tip of New South Wales, Australia, had long been renowned for its pristine beaches and consistent surf breaks. The coastal town, established in the 1800s as a lighthouse settlement, transformed over decades into a haven for surfers, filmmakers, and tourists seeking the perfect blend of natural beauty and laid-back Australian culture. The bay's waters, while generally safe for recreational activities, occasionally attracted marine predators drawn by the abundant fish populations that thrived in the nutrient-rich currents flowing southward from the Gold Coast. On the morning of August 5, 2025, independent filmmaker Cassandra Brookfield had chosen a secluded stretch of beach 3 kilometers north of the main Byron Bay township for her latest project. Her small production company, operating on a modest budget of $40,000, aimed to capture authentic surfing sequences for a thriller titled Riptide Revenge. The film crew consisted of 8 people, including 3 stunt actors who doubled as surfers, 2 camera operators, a sound technician, and 2 safety coordinators. Liam Fletcher, a 29-year-old stunt performer from Brisbane, had worked in low-budget Australian productions for 6 years. His specialty involved water-based sequences, and he possessed strong swimming skills in addition to his surfing expertise. Fletcher had reviewed the morning's shooting schedule with director Brookfield, confirming that the planned scenes would take place in waist-deep water, approximately 50 meters from shore. The weather conditions appeared ideal, with light offshore winds and 2-foot waves, providing perfect visibility for the underwater camera equipment. Joining Fletcher in the water were fellow actors Dorian Blackthorne and Felicity Carmichael, both experienced surfers who had performed stunts in previous Australian surf films. Blackthorne, 32 and originally from Perth, specialized in high-impact action sequences, while Carmichael, 26, brought 15 years of competitive surfing experience to her acting career. The trio had worked together on 2 previous productions and maintained a professional rapport that translated into smooth on-set coordination. The morning shoot commenced at 7:30, with the actors positioned on their surfboards, while cameras captured various angles of their movements. Fletcher paddled furthest from shore, following directions to simulate a surfer scanning the horizon for incoming swells. Blackthorne and Carmichael maintained positions closer to the beach, their boards angled to catch the morning light for dramatic effect. The water temperature registered at 18 degrees Celsius, requiring the actors to wear 3mm wetsuits that provided warmth without restricting movement. At approximately 8:45, as Fletcher adjusted his position on the surfboard, the ocean's surface erupted with shocking violence. A 14-foot great white shark, later estimated by marine biologists to weigh over 1,500 kilograms, surged upward from the deeper water beyond the sandbar. The massive predator had likely been attracted by the unusual activity and the splashing sounds created by the film crew's equipment and movements. The shark's initial strike targeted Fletcher's left leg, which dangled over the edge of his surfboard. Its powerful jaws clamped down with tremendous force, puncturing the wetsuit and sinking rows of serrated teeth into the muscle and bone beneath. Fletcher's scream pierced the morning air as the great white began its characteristic thrashing behavior, designed to disorient and weaken prey. The violent shaking motion immediately pulled Fletcher from his board and into the churning water. Blackthorne, positioned 20 meters away, witnessed the attack unfold and immediately began paddling toward his colleague. However, the shark's massive tail swept sideways during its thrashing, striking Blackthorne's surfboard with enough force to launch him several feet into the air. He landed hard against Carmichael's board, the impact opening a deep gash across his forehead and bruising his ribs as both actors tumbled into the surf. Carmichael, disoriented by the collision, struggled to maintain her bearings as blood began spreading through the water around Fletcher's position. The Great White continued its assault, dragging the stunt actor beneath the surface while maintaining its grip on his leg. Floating pieces of surfboard debris, along with production equipment that had been knocked loose, created additional hazards as the remaining actors attempted to navigate the chaotic scene. From the beach, director Brookfield and her crew witnessed the unfolding disaster with growing horror. Safety coordinator Marcus Steinberg immediately activated the emergency response protocol, notifying both local emergency services and the production company's insurance representatives. Camera operator Jenny Worthington continued filming despite the crisis, recognizing that the footage might prove crucial for subsequent investigations and insurance claims. The film crew's safety equipment included a Zodiac rescue boat with a 40-horsepower outboard motor, which production assistant Kyle Henderson launched within 90 seconds of the initial attack. Henderson, a former surf lifeguard with advanced rescue training, navigated through the debris field. At the same time, crew members on shore threw floating objects toward the victims in an attempt to distract the predator. The Great White released Fletcher after approximately 40 seconds of thrashing, although it was unclear whether this was due to the crew's intervention efforts or the shark's natural feeding behavior. Fletcher, severely injured and losing blood rapidly, managed to grab onto a floating foam board that Henderson had thrown in his direction. The Zodiac reached him within minutes, though extracting him from the water required careful coordination to avoid further injury to his mangled leg. Blackthorne and Carmichael, both conscious despite their injuries, were pulled aboard the rescue boat and transported to shore, where the production's medical team provided immediate first aid. All three victims were subsequently transported to a hospital in Byron Bay, where Fletcher underwent emergency surgery to repair extensive damage to his left leg and foot. Blackthorne required 17 stitches for his head wound, while Carmichael sustained bruised ribs and minor lacerations. Local authorities immediately cordoned off the attack site and issued warnings to other beach users throughout the Byron Bay area. Marine biologists later confirmed that great white sharks occasionally patrol the coastal waters during winter months, following migrating whale pods that pass through the region. The film production was permanently suspended, and all three actors eventually recovered from their injuries, though Fletcher required months of physical therapy before returning to stunt work. Sydney Harbor, one of the world's most recognizable natural harbors, spans 240 square kilometers of intricate waterways, bays, and headlands along Australia's southeastern coast. The harbor's deep channels and abundant marine life have historically attracted various shark species, including great whites that venture into the area while following migrating fish populations. Despite its urban surroundings and heavy boat traffic, the harbor maintains healthy populations of rays, fish, and seals that serve as natural prey for apex predators. The entertainment industry has utilized Sydney Harbor as a filming location since the early 20th century, with its dramatic backdrop providing the setting for countless television productions and films. Safety regulations governing aquatic stunts had evolved significantly over the decades, requiring extensive safety protocols and backup systems for any performance involving potential contact with marine wildlife. In September 2018, the Australian television network commissioned a live special program titled Ultimate Dare, designed to showcase extreme stunts performed by professional stunt performers. The show's producers had obtained special permits to conduct a cage diving sequence near the harbor's eastern entrance, where great white sharks occasionally appeared during the winter months while following whale migration routes. Corey Latham, a 34-year-old stunt performer from Melbourne, had built his reputation over 12 years through increasingly dangerous aquatic performances. His specialties included underwater escapes, high-altitude water entries, and cage diving exhibitions that combined entertainment value with legitimate marine education components. Latham held advanced diving certifications and had completed over 200 cage dives in various international locations without incident. The planned stunt involved Latham jumping from a helicopter hovering 30 meters above the harbor's surface, landing directly inside a reinforced steel cage suspended 5 meters underwater. The cage design incorporated multiple safety features, including emergency air supplies, communication systems, and quick-release mechanisms that would enable rapid extraction in the event of problems during the performance. Television crews positioned themselves on multiple boats surrounding the dive site, with underwater cameras providing additional angles of the descent and cage entry. Marine biologists from the local aquarium served as safety consultants, monitoring water conditions and marine life activity in the immediate area. The production had attracted significant media attention, with live television coverage planned for the evening news broadcasts. Weather conditions on September 23rd appeared ideal for the stunt, with minimal wind and calm seas, providing clear visibility for both the camera crews and safety divers. Latham completed his pre-dive safety checks and confirmed radio communication with the helicopter pilot and dive coordinator. The steel cage had been lowered into position and secured with multiple anchor lines to prevent it from drifting during the performance. At 2:30 in the afternoon, as Latham prepared for his helicopter exit, the dive coordinator reported unusual activity on the sonar equipment. A large marine animal, subsequently identified as a 17-foot great white shark, had approached the cage site and begun circling the suspended structure. Marine biologists on the safety team debated whether to postpone the stunt, but ultimately determined that the cage's protective barriers would prevent any dangerous encounters. The helicopter reached its designated altitude, and Latham positioned himself for the planned descent. Television cameras captured his exit from the aircraft and initial fall toward the harbor's surface. However, a mechanical failure in the cage's positioning system caused the structure to drift approximately 3 meters from its intended location, placing it outside Latham's calculated landing zone. Latham struck the harbor's surface with considerable force, his impact point placing him directly in open water rather than inside the protective cage. The great white shark, attracted by the sudden disturbance and splash, immediately altered its circling pattern and approached the struggling stunt performer. Safety divers, positioned 20 meters away according to protocol, began swimming toward Latham's position, but could not cover the distance quickly enough to intervene. The shark struck Latham from below with tremendous force, its massive jaws clamping onto his torso and dragging him beneath the surface. Television cameras captured the initial moments of the attack, before the water became too disturbed to maintain clear visibility. Safety divers reached the attack site within 90 seconds. But the great white had already inflicted fatal injuries and disappeared into the harbor's deeper channels. Rescue boats converged on the location within minutes, but recovery efforts proved unsuccessful. Harbor authorities immediately suspended all water activities in the area and initiated emergency protocols for shark incidents. Marine wildlife experts later suggested that the shark's behavior represented a typical investigative strike, though the size and power of the animal made survival impossible given the circumstances. Search operations continued for 3 days, ultimately recovering only fragments of Latham's equipment and wetsuit from various locations throughout the harbor. The television production company faced extensive investigations from workplace safety authorities and subsequently implemented comprehensive new protocols for all aquatic stunt work. The incident prompted significant changes in Australian entertainment industry safety standards, particularly regarding the use of protective equipment during filming in shark-infested waters. Marine biologists emphasize that while such attacks remain statistically rare, the combination of unusual circumstances and equipment failures had created conditions that overwhelmed existing safety measures. Latham's death marked the first fatal shark attack associated with commercial television production in Australian waters, leading to mandatory waiting periods and enhanced marine life monitoring for all future aquatic entertainment projects involving potential predator encounters. Riviera Maya's coastal cave systems represent some of Mexico's most challenging underwater environments, where freshwater cenotes meet the Caribbean Sea through complex networks of submerged tunnels. The cave system, known locally as Sistema Sac Actun, located near Playa del Carmen, features particularly complex passages that connect inland cenotes to coastal outlets, creating brackish water conditions that attract technical divers from around the world seeking challenging underwater exploration opportunities. The cave system's unique hydrology created distinct layers of fresh and salt water that mixed in certain areas, producing unusual visual effects and supporting diverse aquatic ecosystems. The brackish water conditions near the coastal outlets allowed saltwater species, including occasional bull sharks, to venture into the cave entrances during high tide periods, when salinity levels increased sufficiently to support marine predators. Javier Morales, a 41-year-old technical diving instructor from Mexico City, had explored cenote systems throughout the Yucatan Peninsula for over 15 years. His extensive experience included advanced certifications in cave diving, mixed gas diving, and underwater rescue operations. Morales regularly guided small groups of experienced divers through the more challenging cenote passages, combining education about geological formations with practical training in technical diving skills. On November 12, 2022, Morales planned to explore a recently discovered passage system in the coastal sections of Sistema Sac Actun, near Playa del Carmen, with two fellow instructors, Elena Vasquez and Roberto Sandoval. The trio intended to survey the brackish water transition zones where the cave system connected to the Caribbean Sea, requiring specialized equipment, including rebreathers, backup air supplies, and cave diving lights designed for extended underwater operations. Weather conditions during the preceding week had been unusual, with Hurricane Karen tracking along the coast and creating higher-than-normal tides that pushed additional saltwater into the coastal cave systems. Local diving operators had reported unusual fish behavior and increased salinity levels in several cave entrances. However, water clarity at the Sistema Sac Actun coastal access points remained acceptable for technical diving operations. The dive team entered the water at a coastal cave entrance, following established protocols for technical cave diving that included redundant safety systems and predetermined turnaround times. Their planned route would take them through the brackish water transition zone before entering a narrow passage that connected to unexplored chambers approximately 80 meters inland from the cave system's coastal opening. Morales led the group through the initial descent, maintaining visual contact with both team members while monitoring the permanent guidelines that marked safe routes through the cavern system. Water visibility was measured at approximately 20 meters, which was adequate for their planned exploration, but reduced from the typical 30-meter clarity that characterizes the cenote under normal conditions. 45 minutes into the dive, as the team approached the entrance to the unmapped passage, Morales detected unusual movement in the water ahead. The narrow confines of the cave system limited his ability to identify the source of the disturbance. However, his experience suggested the presence of a large fish species that did not typically inhabit freshwater cenote environments. A bull shark, measuring approximately 10 feet in length, emerged from the shadows of the cave passage ahead. The predator had followed the increased salinity levels during the recent storm surge, venturing further into the coastal cave system than would normally occur. Bull sharks, unique among shark species for their ability to tolerate both fresh and salt water, regularly patrol the brackish zones where cave systems meet the ocean, but rarely venture as far inland as this particular passage. The confined space of the cave passage eliminated normal escape routes available during open-water shark encounters. Morales, startled by the unexpected encounter, made rapid movements that triggered the shark's aggressive response. The bull shark struck immediately, its powerful jaws clamping onto Morales' right leg just above the knee, while its thrashing motion stirred up sediment, reducing visibility to near zero. Vasquez and Sandoval, following approximately 10 meters behind, initially could not determine the cause of the sudden disturbance ahead of them. The confined nature of the passage prevented them from quickly reaching their team leader, while the churning sediment obscured their view of the ongoing attack. Emergency protocols for cave diving emphasize maintaining contact with guidelines during emergencies. Still, the unprecedented nature of a shark attack in a cenote system left them without specific procedures to follow. The bull shark's continued aggression in the confined space created additional complications, as its movements threatened to damage the diver's equipment and breathing apparatus. Morales' struggles to free himself from the shark's grip exhausted his air supply more rapidly than normal. At the same time, the physical trauma and blood loss weakened his ability to operate his diving equipment effectively. Vasquez managed to reach Morales' position first, but the ongoing shark attack and limited visibility prevented effective rescue attempts from being made. The bull shark, apparently disoriented by the unusual environment and the presence of multiple divers, continued its assault while attempting to navigate the narrow cave passage. Sandoval activated an emergency signaling device, though the cenote's remote location meant that surface support remained 20 minutes away. By the time the shark departed the immediate area, Morales had sustained fatal injuries to his legs and torso. The combination of blood loss, equipment damage, and air supply depletion proved insurmountable despite his companion's rescue efforts. Vasquez and Sandoval managed to transport his body to the cenote's surface, where emergency medical personnel confirmed that he had not survived the encounter. The incident marked the first recorded shark attack in Mexico's coastal cave systems, prompting extensive investigations by marine biologists and cave diving safety organizations. Researchers confirmed that storm surge events could occasionally drive marine predators deeper into brackish cave systems than normal, though such occurrences remained extremely rare. Local diving operators subsequently implemented new safety protocols, requiring salinity and marine life surveys before entering coastal cave passages following significant storm events. The tragedy highlighted the need for expanded emergency procedures to cover unusual predator encounters in brackish water cave systems, where such incidents had not previously been documented. Morales' death prompted the Mexican diving community to establish new training requirements and safety equipment standards for technical coastal cave diving operations. On July 17, 2025, 27-year-old Chloe Vandermeer prepared for what she thought would be a calm, underwater session off the coast of Namibia. She had been diving for many years, known among ocean lovers online for sharing peaceful clips from deep-sea explorations. She had grown up near the coast of New Zealand, where her interest in marine life began. Over time, this interest became her daily life. Chloe was also very good with underwater cameras and often posted live videos from her dives, showing fish, sunken ships, and coral reefs to her followers. Her experience and calm nature made her feel comfortable in places where others felt fear. That day she had planned to film around a quiet shipwreck, which sat deep under the waves, surrounded by thick water full of drifting sand and cloudy currents. The sunken cargo ship rested far below the surface, tilted to one side with its broken steel parts now home to sea creatures. The sea was rough that day, and strong currents pushed through the wreckage. Visibility was very poor. Chloe was not alone in the water. Her dive partner stayed nearby but out of frame, keeping an eye out for safety. Despite the swirling water and low light, she began streaming live from her waterproof camera, slowly moving over the wreck, pointing the lens at small fish and rusted metal. As she floated gently over the seabed, the shape came out of nowhere. A massive great white shark, nearly 14 feet long, shot forward from the side of the wreck like a missile. It struck her thigh with full force. The sharp teeth sank deep through her wetsuit, tearing muscle and puncturing deep into flesh. The shark's body twisted with power, its tail slamming against parts of the ship, sending waves of motion through the water. Chloe was tossed by the force, her leg pouring blood into the sea, making the cloudy water turn red. In shock, but still aware, Chloe swung her camera case hard at the shark. She knew it was her only chance to keep it away. At the same time, her dive partner moved fast, using fins and noise to make the shark turn its head. The loud splashes and sudden movement gave Chloe the few seconds she needed. She kicked away from the wreck, rising toward the light far above, her hands still gripping the broken camera rig. The surface felt farther than usual, but she made it. Once above water, rescue began quickly. A call went out, and within minutes, a medical helicopter arrived. Chloe was rushed to the nearest hospital for emergency help. Her wounds were serious, deep cuts and holes in her leg, but she survived. Later, the video was removed from all websites because of how graphic and upsetting it was. The event served as a sharp reminder that even skilled divers, with all their planning and tools, are still small in the world of predators that move through the sea unseen. The emergency helicopter flew fast across the sky, its blades cutting through the wind as it carried Chloe to the closest hospital. Inside, doctors and nurses waited with stretchers and supplies. Her leg was wrapped tightly to stop the bleeding, but the wounds were still bad. The medical team worked quickly, moving her into a clean room where machines beeped softly and bright lights shone above. She needed stitches, bandages, and strong medicine to keep her from feeling pain. The doctors cleaned the bite area and checked for damage to her muscles and bones. The deep holes in her leg were clear signs of the power behind the shark's jaws. As she rested, news of the livestream began to spread online. Many people had watched it live, their screens filled with bubbles, flashes of movement, and the sudden appearance of the great white. The footage was clear enough to show blood in the water and the panic that followed. Viewers were shocked and frightened. They started sharing the video in different places, and soon it was all over the internet. People who had never watched diving streams before were now talking about the attack. Some felt scared, others felt sad. A few felt angry that such a dangerous dive had been shown live. Very quickly, video websites took down the recording. The pictures were too graphic. There were cries for better rules around live streaming from dangerous places. Experts explained that sharks do not attack people often, but this event showed how fast things can go wrong. Ocean safety became a big topic. Diving groups began sharing tips and warnings. Some even paused their trips near shipwrecks to check if the areas were safe. Chloe's story made many people think twice before getting into the water with only a camera and a wetsuit. Chloe stayed in the hospital for days. Her body healed slowly, but her thoughts were still full of the event. She remembered the moment the shark came out of the wreck. She remembered the sharp pain and the noise under the water. She thought of her dive buddy who helped save her life. Even after the wounds began to close, the memory stayed sharp. Doctors said her leg would recover, but she would need rest, therapy, and time away from diving. Her fans sent messages, flowers, and drawings to wish her well. Some wrote letters about how brave she was. Others said her video made them respect the sea more than ever before. Outside the hospital, the sky stayed clear and warm, but Chloe knew she would not return to the water soon. The ocean had given her many calm dives, but now it had shown her something wild and true. People still talked about the stream. They remembered the speed of the shark and the fear in the deep water. Even though the video was gone, the image stayed in their minds. The sea remained wide and deep, holding secrets and dangers in its quiet blue shadows.